Good morning, everybody. It's 3 minutes past 10. Thank you very much for joining us here on this CABE webinar on CBICAS scope extension and revalidation. It's great to see so many people in the room. This session is being recorded and will be available for others to watch subsequently. Also, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A section on the webinar interface. I have worked this presentation up bespoke, so we're going to try and get through it in about 45 minutes and allow 15 minutes or so for questions and answers at the end if you have any. So firstly, welcome, as I say. What we're going to look at today is to provide a brief update on where the CBICAS scheme has got to. We're going to look at the scope extension process for CBICAS, talk about certification and registration. For building inspectors, it's really, really important that everyone understands how the certification they get from their scheme, whether it's CBICAS or another scheme, maps onto their registration status and who has responsibility for what and when. And then I'm going to talk you through revalidation and the work we're doing to provide tools to help you work through your building inspector revalidation and certification process. So, brief update, CBICAS scheme is still running. We have a steady flow of people coming into assessment. The system remains as it was originally, with three kind of key stages: an application and portfolio submission, submission of a technical report and competence statements, and then a professional review interview. CBICAS remains an Engineering Council accredited scheme, and everyone who goes through the scheme does have the option to apply for Engineering Council registration at IEng, but it's an opt-in, so you do need to opt into that at the initial assessment stage. In terms of numbers going through the schemes, in total, since we launched the scheme, we've had 806 stage 1 applications. We issued information to 718 candidates at stage 2 and received 655 stage 2 submissions. We've completed 597 interviews, of which 70 were outright fails, but somewhere in the region of 40% of applicants are awarded a reduced scope compared to the original scope they applied for, and sometimes a lower class with a different scope. Interestingly, around about 90% of successful applicants go on to register as incorporated engineer, and it's something that we would certainly encourage. At the moment, we've got 26 applications in process, so that's 10 applications that are processing and 16 interviews that are arranged. We've learned a lot from going through that initial 12 to 18-month period. The registration scheme is different to membership applications in certain key ways. It clearly has a much bigger impact in terms of its outcome. Those who apply for membership are often looking to have additional evidence to support their career development, whereas the registration scheme is critical to being able to work. And that's obviously kind of created additional stresses. It's very clear that where people have a supportive employer who puts resource and time into helping them through the process, training them, providing the right development activities, mock interviews, maybe buddies or mentors to help them through the process, they progress really well. But some applicants who are less well supported really struggle. So we've looked at what we can do to help with that. We are close to launching a bespoke mentoring system, which is software-based, that will enable us to pair up experienced mentors and CBICAS candidates to help them through the assessment process. We'll be running more online walkthroughs to explain the process, led by our membership team. We've procured a new competence management system, and that competence management system has our version of the building inspector competence framework, the CBICOF, integrated into that system. So you can use the framework that we use to assess against for the CBICAS scheme And that has various tools to help self-assessment, to develop professional development plans, to do gap analysis to identify where you've got strengths and weaknesses. So that's there to help you pre-assessment, but also then through subsequent career development. And it includes all the different grades of CABE, building inspector competence. And that includes two level 1 competence frameworks that can be used for early career development. And we're also procuring a new CPD and development reporting platform, which will enable tracking against CBICAS competencies. So again, you can map the CPD that you do directly against the different aspects of the CBICAS competence framework, which integrates the building safety regulators competence framework. And that will then be useful and very clear evidence of how you are managing and maintaining your competence for revalidation purposes, which we'll get onto later. If you'd like to act as a mentor or panel assessor or support CABE's other processes, please do get in touch with us at membership@cbuild.com. We're always grateful for your support and involvement. Let's talk first about scope extension. Hopefully everyone is aware that CABE offers a scope extension process, which is a refined assessment against the CBICAS framework, and allows building inspectors to extend the certified scope within a particular class. Just to be very, very clear, if you want to go from class 2 to 3, then you will need to go through a full assessment process, because that classification jump is highly assessed. The scope extension process focuses on the technical and contextual issues relating to a wider range of building work that you are expected to or want to assess. Clearly, the expectation is that you, in preparation to go for a scope extension, you'd have worked with your line manager or a manager of some form to agree a development plan, including how you will undertake work under supervision to build necessary knowledge and relevant experience of that extended scope. Again, you can use the CABE CMS as a vehicle for that, or you could use the competence management systems that exist within your workplace. What's important is that you have a plan at the outset, that you execute that plan and retain and submit the evidence of how that's been done. So what does the scope extension process involve? It's based on a career evidence and submission of case studies. So rather than there being a technical report, as there is in a full CABE class 2 or 3 assessment, we're asking you to submit a case study with an 800-word explanatory competence statement for each of the case studies that you want to use as evidence, and then just provide supporting information from the project itself, rather than having to write a technical report. That's then subject to desktop review by assessors, and that is then followed up by an interview. We can offer, in addition to various combinations of extended scope, we can offer to extend people's certification to cover Wales or England if their original certification didn't cover Wales or England. To do that, you would need to provide the same evidence and process as the normal scope extension, which could be at an existing or expanded scope in the jurisdiction you want the scope extension to apply for. But you need those case studies to include work in England or Wales if you want to have your certificate extended to England or Wales. Clearly, you can do a scope extension at the same time as demonstrating additional competence to work in Wales or England if you don't already have that on your certificate. So there's various scope extension options. They're set out in the guidance documents and map onto the combination of residential and commercial or non-residential building types that are required in the BSR's BICOF. But we can also, if you wish, offer you an assessment for Class 4 as a technical manager. Now, it's very clear now that there is no requirement to be assessed for Class 4. But if you wish to have a third-party assessment of your ability to act as a manager, then that option is open to you. Just so that there's no confusion, we do understand that the BSR allows Class 2 and 3 inspectors to self-declare at Class 4 without evidence or certification, but we offer that certification as part of a comprehensive assessment scheme. You can find all of the details relating to scope extension on the CABE website. That includes a complete guide which covers all aspects of the process, the application form for scope extension, a project summary template, which just provides a brief example of what is expected from you, and a CPD template. Clearly, you can use other formats, and once our new CPD reporting system is online, we'd recommend you use that. It will be free, as is the competence management system to all CABE members. But we will be rolling that CPD recording platform out for building inspectors first, probably at some stage in mid to late November. Key to any of the assessments we are talking about is an understanding of the Building Inspector Competence Framework, or the CBICAS as we call it. I'll refer back to this again during this presentation, but please, you do use it to look at the job descriptions that are integrated in there, look at it as a resource to help self-assess and measure where you are, and as a guide to what kind of development activities would be useful. What's required for scope extension? So background information would include an up-to-date CV, CPD and professional development planning or personal development plan records, an organogram showing the positions you've held in the organisation you work for, or if you've worked in multiple organisations recently, it might be more than one. And we also recommend that you keep a record of the type and scale of work you undertake. When we talk about revalidation, I'll go into more detail about how keeping a log of your professional work is useful, but essentially this is evidence for assessors that you have undertaken a suitable range of work at a given type and scale relative to the scope extension you're applying for. In terms of the stage 1 scope extension submission, we ask for a personal statement and professional development statement. So that's one statement in itself, which sets out the work that you do. It sets out the way you approach your role as a professional building inspector. It should talk about how you've assessed your professional development needs and how you've then identified what needs to be done and undertaken those activities. You can then have a number of case studies. If you're applying for residential only, then perhaps one case study will be enough. If you're applying for scope extension to residential and commercial, it's probable that you will need either a mixed use case study or a study from each of those categories. You can have more than 2 case studies, but we recommend you try to keep it to a maximum of 3. And each of those case studies will have a statement, an 800-word statement, which should describe key aspects of the project, your role, what activities and functions you undertook in relation to that, particular areas of compliance that are of interest, and you can supply up to 20 pages of supporting evidence. So that can be both documentary evidence in terms of correspondence, certification, but also should include some further information such as drawings to help the assessors understand the nature of the case study. Once that submission is received, there'll be a desktop review of that evidence by the assessors, and that will be followed by an interview by 2 panel assessors as per the original assessment. The professional development statement needs to demonstrate that you've undertaken an assessment to identify any knowledge and skill gaps required to meet the extended scope, the necessary development activity to develop additional skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. And it should or could include activities such as self-assessment of prior qualifications, training and experience, gap analysis, identifying development needs, and a programme of self-guided learning, And that statement could include a program of supervised and checked work to develop suitable experience, which might include oversight of plans assessment, shadowing inspection activities and/or mentoring activities by a suitably experienced RBI. The case studies should be directly relevant to the scope of new work you're looking to be certified to undertake. They should cover examples of both residential and commercial buildings if more than one aspect of scope's applied for. Preferably, they should demonstrate work at the higher end of the scope extension you want to apply for if you're looking to go up through multiple categories of scope, and should consist of up to 800-word summary and identifying key aspects of the case study and 20 pages of supporting information, as I said previously. What will the assessors be looking to ensure that the candidate can demonstrate? The scope extension process is more focused on the technical and procedural aspects combined with any additional ethical considerations. It's not looking to reassess all of the fundamental competence requirements at a given class of registration. So assessors will be looking to see evidence of appropriate professional development plans, training, development, and supervision. Suitable experience, that's why keeping a log of your work is really helpful to support the assessors in understanding your competence. That you can demonstrate suitable experience of undertaking restricted activities or functions under supervision prior to April 6th, 2024 or subsequent to that. So if you haven't worked under supervision, but you had significant experience prior to the 6th of April, that may be relevant, but as time goes on, that becomes less and less valid as evidence. That you understand construction technologies and systems, their practical application, relevant to extended scope, which are covered in competencies A1A, A1B, and A2. Understand regulatory standards and requirements, which is competence B1A in the framework. Understand any additional procedural and legal requirements relevant to the extended scope of certification, which are competencies B1B, B2, and B3. As I said, you also need to think carefully about whether the new scope of work brings with it any additional ethical requirements as set out in competence E5. But regardless of whether that has changed, you'll be expected to be reflective and be able to explain the key ethical issues relating to your undertaking those functions on that type of work. Fees and timescales. When you initially submit, it'll take us about 2 weeks to process and check prior to allocating your information to assessors. The assessors have 4 to 6 weeks to undertake the desktop assessment and indicate whether the submission is sufficiently complete to proceed to interview. So we will normally be in touch within 6 to 8 weeks. An interview will then be arranged usually within 4 weeks of the desktop review being completed. Once that interview has taken place, there'll be ratification of the scope extension, taking anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks, depending on the complexity of the ratification process and whether there are any complicating factors. So in all, the scope extension process will take somewhere between 12 and 16 weeks. The application, administration and assessment fee is £235 and the interview fee is £120. Now I'm going to move on to talking about certification and registration. So actually the issue of how you maintain your professional status as a building inspector, or rather registered status. So there is a fundamental difference between certification and registration. Certification refers to the assessment process and outcome from the CBICAS scheme or from the other approved assessment schemes where you are going through them. Registration relates to the process of an individual building inspector applying to the building safety regulator to be formally registered. So we use certification to mean the outcome from our assessment process, whereas registration is about your role in applying to the BSR and maintaining your registered status. So certification runs for a 4-year period from the date of ratification of your CBICAS assessment result. That date is on your certificate as issued. It's your responsibility as a registered building inspector to ensure you always have a valid certificate from one of the approved schemes. Just as a note, and I'll cover this off in more detail in a moment, you can change which scheme you use for certification, but there's no mechanism to transfer between schemes at the current time. The critical issue is you should always have a valid certificate from one of the assessment schemes at any given time when you are working as a registered building inspector. Registration runs for 4 years from the date of your first registration, whether at Class 1 or a higher class. It is your responsibility to manage that registration using the certification provided as evidence. Registration and certification dates do not change as a result of scope extension, but certification date will be updated if your class of certification changes. Your registration date is going to stay the same for the remainder of your career unless there is a period where you deregister and re-register. So that registration date is the point at which you will need to submit evidence to the regulator that you have a valid certificate from a scheme. Now, this is quite complicated. If I'm sure that everyone is aware that a lot of people were able to register at Class 1, or actually, if they went early into a registration scheme, obtain certification at Class 2 or 3 prior to the 6th of April 2024. But the building safety regulator did not have powers to formally register anyone until the 6th of April 2024, as set out in legislation. So for a great many people who are acting as registered building inspectors, the effective registration date is the 6th of April. If, as in this example, they achieved a certification from CABE on the 3rd of March 2024, then they will need to get their certificate renewed before the 3rd of March 2028, 4 years on, but their registration renewal date will stay as the 6th of April 2028. So in this instance, if you obtained certification before the 6th of April 2024, the candidate would need to be recertified before their registration renewal date. So they've got a valid certificate at the date of renewal. An alternative example, if an initial registration at Class 1 took place on the 1st of January 2024, but the certification did not happen until the 5th of August 2024, with an effective registration date of the 6th of April 2024, then the certificate received on the 5th of August 2024 would still be valid when the registration renewal date arrives on the 6th of April 2028. They would, however, need to ensure that their certificate was still renewed before the 5th of August 2028, as it's their obligation to always hold a valid certificate. So in this case, candidate 2 would not need to be recertified before their registration renewal date, but would need to be getting a renewed certificate before it expires on the 5th of August 2028. So key takeaways: certification and registration are the individual responsibility of each registered building inspector. You must always hold a valid certification. Certification is then used to demonstrate ongoing competence at the point of registration or renewal of registration, and that certification and registration dates and periods may overlap and are unlikely to be the same. You will need to be revalidated for certification purposes by the end of the 4-year period from your original certificate date, unless you go through a process of moving between classes, i.e. Class 2 or 3, from Class 2 to 3 typically. If you move from Class 2 to 3, that will be a full assessment and you'll be issued with a new certificate with a new certification date that will run for 4 years from that date before you need to go through the revalidation process. Further note about moving between schemes and an explanation why this is the case. There are currently no mechanisms to transfer certification between schemes. If you want to move schemes, you'll need to undertake a full reassessment. The reason for that is that all three schemes are regulated by different oversight bodies. CABE, CBICAS, is regulated by the Engineering Council, which stipulates that certain assessment requirements have to be met. BSCF is regulated by UCAS, which stipulates a different set of requirements and assessment criteria. And I should say the BCCA, not TTD, apologies, Dave Barley, is regulated by Ofqual, which again has a different set of assessment criteria. For the CBICAS scheme, we cannot certify anyone who has not also met the requirements to demonstrate competence as an incorporated engineer set by the Engineering Council. So we cannot recognise certification of other schemes. Okay, let's move on to revalidation. A very key area relating to assessment and reassurance of ongoing competence. So the different schemes take different approaches, but CABE takes a holistic whole scheme approach to competence assessment and management. What that means is that the revalidation process is different to a full assessment process. So there are clearly a number of components in the CBICAS scheme. We have a full assessment, we have scope extension, we have revalidation. These three processes fit together to produce a holistic competence management system for building inspectors from the earliest stage of their careers through to the most senior levels. Competence-based systems rely on annual self-assessment and personal development planning. So on an annual basis, you should be sitting down probably at the same time that you go and check that your CPD records are up to date. Think about your development needs, preferably using self-assessment tools. Set that out in a structured way, again, using personal development planning tools such as our competence management system. Identify the right development activities you need to meet those needs. Record your CPD, including reflection on learning outcomes and the learning that you've actually achieved through that development. And that then contributes a large part to the revalidation assessment, which takes place every 4 years. Revalidation in the CABE scheme is an assessment of how well individuals have managed or maintained or developed their competence over the revalidation period. It's not a reassessment of class, and it follows a different procedure from a full class assessment with different submission criteria. So what do you need for a revalidation package? Well, very much the same as a scope extension. There's a professional logbook, as we refer to it, up-to-date CV, 4 years CPD and PDP records, organograms showing positions held or multiple organograms if you've moved between organisations over that time, and a record of the type and scale of work undertaking, record of type and scope, I guess class and scope as well. The revalidation submission includes a personal statement, very similar to the personal and professional statement for scope extension, and then 5 competence statements covering the 5 key sections of the CABE Building Inspector Competence Framework. Sorry. Once that evidence is submitted, it will be desktop reviewed, and then there will be an interview with 2 CABE trained panel assessors. We'll be starting this process in June 2027. The earliest certifications we have are towards the end of 2027. So we'll be taking a relatively small number of candidates through this process just to check that it is working properly. We intend to publish further information on the revalidation process either towards the end of this year or early in 2026, so that there is a much clearer explanation of what you will need to submit. All CBICAS inspectors should, in our view, use the CABE CMS to undertake their annual self-assessment against CABE-BICOF. That's going to be the best evidence. That will help you develop a personal development plan. We recommend you look to invest properly in your development activities. The better quality assured, the more in-depth the development activities you undertake, the higher the score you are likely to get through a desktop assessment process. But that should be based on identifying areas for development rather than just random CPD. It's still important to do contextual CPD. Short form CPD is still very valid, but good evidence of substantive learning and development will help you score well in the desktop review and help you explain and demonstrate that you've managed your competence properly at the revalidation stage. And as I said, keep an annual log of projects, work, types of work, key lessons learnt, any work under supervision you've undertaken, and any key development milestones. Although it is something additional to do on top of your day-to-day job, and we get that, and we know that this all sits on top of a heavy workload, when you get to the end of a revalidation period, having a logbook where you just jot down kind of really important lessons, any particularly important issues, is tremendously helpful in writing your competence statements, because it will prompt you to look back at projects where there is good evidence of how you acted competently. The process will take 12 to 16 weeks, so you need to make sure that you are booking onto this. We would recommend at least 6 months in advance of your recertification, and we'll publish further details before the end of this year. Applications will be in pre-bookable cohorts, so identify when you want to go through that assessment and get booked on early. So you should start assembling your professional logbook as soon as possible. So an updated CV should contain contact information, professional profile, your key skills, professional experience, education and qualifications, professional memberships, and if relevant, references. Your CPD records, we will want to see 4 years CPD covering the revalidation period. That should include learning outcomes and reflective statements, personal development plans, and any supporting certificates or qualifications. Obviously, if you can get third-party certified CPD, again, it's going to be stronger evidence than self-guided learning, although self-guided learning is entirely valid. Organograms, which help show your position in relation to others, and work records, as I've said, the number of projects, the type of work, class and scope, your role, were you undertaking site inspection, plan assessment, both? Were you acting as a technical manager overseeing multiple individual inspectors' workloads, and keeping notes of particular events or issues, as I said, is helpful in assembling competence statements. There are 6 400 to 700 word competence statements. The more complex work that you do, the higher the scope and class you have, the more evidence we would expect to see in each of the statements. The first is a personal statement, which is an account of how you've managed and developed your competence over the revalidation period and your approach to acting as a professional building inspector. And then 5 statements. So Section A, technical knowledge, including specific reference to construction, technology, and building services. Section B is application of knowledge, including specific reference to undertaking restricted activities and functions and building control law. Section C is management and should refer to management and core skills amongst the other competencies listed. Section D is interpersonal skills, which is about your approach to work in a professional collaborative manner. And Section E is professional commitment, which should include specific reference to the Registered Building Inspector Code of Conduct, safety management, and ethics. You should be mindful that the assessors will want to see evidence that you are aware of and have undertaken suitable learning or development activity or review of how the standards and legislation and industry practice have changed during that revalidation period. Again, we would recommend you utilize the Building Inspector Competence Framework. This is, as I said, integrated into our CMS. Use that to prompt your own thinking about what to include in the competence statements. The core competence areas for building inspectors are set out in the different where they sit within our framework is specified within the BICOF. So you need to make sure that you are clear about those expectations, which repeat the competence requirements from the Building Safety Regulators competence framework. They're highlighted in the dark green boxes within the CABE BICOF. And the way we recommend you utilize the framework is that you look at the scope and think about how comfortable you feel about your knowledge, understanding, and application of the scope, and then use the indicative evidence as a way of identifying specific examples that can be used in competence statements or in your interview stage. But the framework is there to help, as is the competence management system that we've procured. So this includes, as I said, it fully integrates the CABE BICOF into the system, so you can use that to self-assess, develop gap analysis, and do professional development planning. And if you want to get further information, then please look at the QR code that's available for this. And there will be webinars online explaining how to use that. As I said, we're procuring a new CPD recording program called My Career Path, which will be tailored to CABE's needs. It's the same platform as used by other professional engineering institutes. It includes the CABE and CBICAS competence frameworks, supports reflective learning practice, enables you to record evidence against specific areas of competence from the framework. So you can create a report that shows how much time and what you've done against each of the different A, B, C, D, and E competencies. And we're going to roll that out as a priority to CABE registered building inspectors so they can start using this early. That'll be made available at some stage in November. And we will communicate directly with everyone in the CBICAS scheme. And we'll then make it available to members of any other assessment scheme and CABE members in spring 2026. And we'll publish further information on that in due course. To help you find better quality CPD, we've launched a new approval scheme for approved CPD, approved training, and then accredited training from academic institutions, which all sit in a framework that's topped out by the accredited academic qualifications that we also recognise. So the CMS system does include a growing database of approved and accredited training. We're going to continue to invest to grow that resource, but essentially it's a good starting point if you are looking for training, having identified some development needs. We have a whole set of regional conferences run by our committees, the Build Eng events, which are really popular and deliver great CPD. But we're also relaunching our Built Environment series of national face-to-face and online on-demand conferences next year. So there'll be a face-to-face conference in England, Wales, and Ireland, but also 4 half-day online conferences covering core CPD requirements, and we'll look to expand that over time. Clearly, we also have our long-standing Webinar Wednesdays series, which is a series of 12 webinars hosted monthly, which brings really good core professional issues and makes those available to all of our members. Please make use of the app. We're going to continue to develop the app. It's a great way of doing contextual CPD or using spare time to do more CPD. You've got access on the app to the digital version of the Building Engineer, so it's a great way to get access to all of the articles and additional features online. You can access all of CABE's videos, including our webinar Wednesdays and other CPD sessions, key documents and other elements. And we will be looking to integrate access to the CPD recording platform so that you can very quickly and easily jot down particularly informal CPD activities that can be directly recorded into the My Career Path app. We're also continuing to provide our traditional training courses, which are delivered by subject matter experts. There's a whole range available. Certificate in Building Controls, probably our flagship training course. We have great fire safety practitioner certificate training, future homes Part L, plan interpretation, structural design for non-structural designers, much more. And we're going to be looking to expand that provision in areas that will be directly relevant to building inspectors over time. So moving on to the cost of all of this, where are we going with the fees? Our first year retention fee was £95. This year it will be £65, and from 2026 onwards it'll be £55. That reflects the cost of us operating the scheme. We've had to invest more upfront to deliver the CMS, to deliver the career path system, to deliver and maintain and expand, our assessment processes to include scope extension and revalidation. But we want this to come down to the same fee as we charge for the other specialist registrations we have on an annual basis. So that will come down to £55 a year from 2026 onwards. In terms of the revalidation process, we still need to fully establish what that will cost, but we think it will be in the region of £250 at the point of revalidation, and we're committed to running both the CBICAS scheme and the revalidation process as close to cost as possible. In association with the CBICAS scheme, we are looking to launch a sister scheme, effectively provisionally titled the CBICAS Consult, which is a new competence assessment scheme for professionals who deliver compliance services outside of the restricted activities and functions. So this is in response to requests from a lot of members who are not working as registered building inspectors, but want to have evidence of their competence. It relies on the same competence standards as the main CBICAS scheme, but essentially it utilizes or permits use of evidence of non-regulated functions and activities instead of work as a registered building inspector. So we think that's going to be relevant, particularly to building inspectors working on the Crown estate who can't evidence that they are actually working as a regulator within the building control framework because of the exemption for Crown estate. So that's MOD, government estate, rail, airports. They very much, we think, have an appetite to be able to show that they have equivalent competence. It's important. So this scheme is primarily aimed at servicing those needs, but it's also relevant to building control consultants and principal designers who are using certification as an RBI to evidence competence. Should be very, very clear that this CBICAS Consult scheme does not provide certification that can be used to register with the BSR. It is not valid for registration purposes. It is a separate but equivalent assessment of competence to advise or act as a building inspector outside the registered framework. So if you want to have a certificate that's used for registration purposes, you will need to go through the main CBICAS scheme. The name for this may change. We're looking to see whether we need to differentiate it more. But in effect, it will sit as a parallel scheme which gives access to CABE membership or CABE membership upgrades and engineering council registration in the same way. So key summaries. CBICAS continues to provide a continuous improvement pathway from Class 1 to Class 4. We have a flexible scope extension process, which enables you to get scope extension, including to England and Wales, if you haven't already got that registration. The revalidation process focuses on evidence of annual competence management and good professional development practices, as well as evidencing that you are still suitably competent across the full A to E range of competencies. 100% of CBICAS members will need to be revalidated at interview. And the new CBICAS consult scheme is going to be available for inspectors not undertaking restricted activities and functions. We think that CBICAS provides relatively low cost of certification over a 4-year period, around about £500, including the annual fees and revalidation fee. And of course, there's no VAT applicable for CABE members. We've provided a bespoke competence management system and CPD locking platform to support building inspectors in the CBICAS scheme to help demonstrate their ongoing competence. Both CBICAS and CBICAS Consult come with Engineering Council registration at IEng as an optional qualification or outcome. And we will be launching a new specialist section. Members may be aware we recently launched a residential surveying section, which is a specialist accreditation within the CABE membership. We will shortly be launching a building control and standards section, which CBICAS members will automatically be entitled to join at no extra cost. Non-CBICAS members will need to pay a £55 specialist registration fee as per the annual retention fee for CBICAS members. That section is intended to help us develop bespoke content and support for registered building inspectors over time. So it's a vehicle for us to better work with that particular group within the membership and to help them in the development of their career and to maintain and deliver excellence in building control services. So that obviously comes alongside all of the other great memberships, benefits of CABE membership, including discounted training and the great Building Engineer Journal. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to look to the Q&A to see what we have in here and see if I can answer those questions. So the first is, will the CBICAS scope extension scheme enable me to also gain my CBILD classification? I'm currently MCABE. If you want to get CBILD E, you would have to go through the CBICAS assessment that is tied in at class 3. So the class 2 scope are linked into MCABE grade and class 3 are linked into CBILD E. So the answer is that you would need to look for a class 3 assessment rather than a scope extension to do those two jointly. What I would say is that there's nothing stopping you from going for the CBILD E assessment separately. Obviously not the answer you want. I think having these blended schemes where you've got multiple memberships or registrations is efficient in lots of ways, but we can't create a universal level of efficiency that does absolutely everything in one process at all times, essentially because the competence frameworks are written to map onto a grade at a given class. So I'm sorry, the answer is not that you can't do both at the same time. Second, if I'm using scope extension to apply for 2F, currently 2 and wanting to include Wales, does my 2F project need to be in Wales? Yes. The basic assumption for all of our assessments is that there is a need to show evidence that you've garnered experience of that type of work, as well as having the knowledge and understanding. So if you go back to the principles of SCABE, skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours, we expect all of those to be covered off within the assessment process. So you would need to do some work in Wales as that case study under supervision, in effect, and bring that evidence to your scope extension. Can level RBIs who are not involved in restricted activities and functions use their BRPD advisory experience for revalidation? Well, that came quite early on. The answer is no, but there will be an opportunity through the CBICAS consult scheme or whatever it is eventually entitled for RBIs who are not doing restricted activity and functions to obtain certification, and we will think very carefully about whether existing CBICAS registrants can revalidate into that CBICAS consult rather than go through a full reassessment, but we haven't decided on that as yet. I'm guessing that would be something that would be quite attractive to those who've already been through the CBICAS scheme. If you haven't been through CBICAS, we can't consider those kind of transfers across into CBICAS consult. You'd need to go through a full 3 CBICAS consult application. Just to clarify, will the scope extension give me a new certificate for my registration? You'll get a new certificate with the new scope, but your certification date will not change. So we've discussed this with the building safety regulator. Scope extension, yes, new certificate. It will state the new scope that you have. We will inform the building safety regulator in our periodic returns that your scope that we've certified has changed, but your certification date won't change. The only time that a certificate date changes is when you go through revalidation, when it will be re-extended for a further 4-year period, or if you go through a new class assessment, so class 2, 3, or even 4. Are the timeframes for revalidation allowing for the bottlenecking that is likely to occur as a result of dates of certification and registration? So the cohorts are designed to reflect the likely throughput, and that throughput is actually spread over a 10 or 12-month period, and the number of people who will go through that will also be spread out by either people who don't renew as time goes on, people who move from class 2 to class 3 who'll get a new certificate. So we've mapped when we certified people, and we will put the right resource in place, both at assessment and ratification, to be able to cope with that estimated throughput. So now that we've been through this process, we've got numbers. Numbers means that we can develop the right resource to ensure that we deliver against the time scales we've promised. Now, within that, there is a caveat clearly that if there are appeals or a candidate does not get through the process, it's better to have at least another 12 weeks on top before your certification expires, so that compensatory measures or other a re-interview, an appeal interview, etc., can take place. So that's why we recommend that you look for a cohort that's 6 months ahead of the date of your original certification. Okay, revalidation process suggests that this is not a reassessment of class. Does this mean learning outcomes can be evidenced based behaviours and competent decision-making rather than building types? For instance, where there is a shortage of a wide range of building classes, this will impact on evidence. Rob, I'm not quite sure I understand that. Let me read that again. I think I'm going to pick that up with you directly, Rob. But within that revalidation process, you need to be showing in the competence statements that you have knowledge, understanding, and talk about how you've applied it. That will be combined with the evidence of how you've managed and maintained your competence. If you've been working on a narrower scope within your class and scope, it's about how well you've managed your competence to deliver that work. But we would hope that people are working kind of quite broadly across the areas of scope that they've got within their license. I hope that kind of answers the question. I'm not sure if it does 100%, but I can pick that up with you later, Rob. Robert Edis, will the new CBICAS consult process enable RBIs who leave building control profession for a period of time to re-enter building control and recertify for RBI CBICAS? At the moment, we haven't linked those two together, and we haven't asked the BSR to recognise any linkage between the two. That's a conversation we're hoping to have at some stage, i.e. to be able to give partial recognition to CBICAS Consult. It's certainly an option, but that's not within our gift. Typically, I think where CBICAS Consult would help people move back into the building control industry is that they would have an ongoing assessment that employers could be confident in taking them back in and reintegrating them into the building inspector workforce. So we do see this as a way of helping enable people move back into building control over time if they've stepped away from that in the short to medium term. Next question. Does RBI CBICAS certification provide direct access for the CBICAS Consult Scheme certification? We're looking at that. The intention has been that this should service people who have not gone through a CBICAS scheme certification as of yet, but it's almost certain that there'll be the ability to transfer across from the main CBICAS scheme in to the CBICAS Consult scheme for revalidation purposes. I went to apply for FCABE and noticed it's being changed. Any insight into what the changes are? Okay, different question, but the Membership and Professional Standards Committee have been undertaking a wholesale review of the expectations for FCABE membership. They are looking to publish those in the relatively near future. I don't have a publication date to hand. What that will include is much stronger evidence, not just of seniority, but that fellows are delivering wider public interest benefits and working more widely to support improvement of the industry. So as with some of the other grades of membership, we are on a kind of long-term continuous process of looking for improvement, and the review of the FCABE membership criteria maps onto that. So there'll be further detail of that published fairly soon. The criteria, I think, have now been fully approved. But yeah, so that has changed, and you'll need to keep your eye out on the website and in the comms to see when that's published. If you want to drop me a line, you're anonymous there, so I don't know who you are, but I can make sure you're on a list of people to be told about those changes when they come out. What's the process for achieving level 2 inspector status? There are separate webinars on that process. So the key difference is that submission criteria are significantly greater. The level 2 framework is set out in the CABE CBICOF, which covers CABE membership, Engineering Council and Building Safety Regulator competence requirements. The assessment process involves submitting 19 or so competence statements and a technical report, which are desktop reviewed, and then an interview as well. Full details are available on the CABE website. So if you go to the CBICAS pages on our website, you can download a complete guide that takes you through all of the detail of what's required to achieve a level 2 class 2 inspector status. Thanks, John, for that. And then W. Durrant, you mentioned moving between schemes is not catered for at this time. Will this be reviewed at some point? It's very difficult to see how that would be facilitated. The schemes are set up to meet a set of scheme approval criteria issued by the BSR, but they are all, as I said, set up within different forms of assessment oversight framework. So they're all regulated in different ways. We would not be able to bring anyone into the CBICAS scheme directly unless they had IEng recognition. So it's very unlikely that there will be a kind of scheme transfer protocol that's kind of workable. So I'm sorry about that, but the schemes I think are too different. Never say never. It may be possible at some point in the future, and that's fine. So, and then David Clayton, can you explain with more detail why appropriate RBI plan checking and site inspection work in the consulting and Why? Appropriate RBI plan checking and site inspection work in the consultant and advisory space, and RBI ability to articulate the legislative framework and function around restriction and function being discounted as qualifying evidence. Oh, sorry, I just don't understand the question that you're asking, Dave. The primary difference, sorry, the expectation is that consultants going through the CBICAS consult scheme and those going through the main CBICAS scheme will have all of the same knowledge and understanding, both technically, both in terms of the law, both in terms of the process. It is that the evidence that they would use to demonstrate that understanding would be different, primarily because we require that only evidence for the main CBICA scheme, only evidence of undertaking restricted activities and functions is acceptable. And that's true for scope extension, revalidation. We don't accept evidence of undertaking other jobs or roles as evidence in the CBICAS process. So there should be no difference in the knowledge, understanding, underpinning competence of a person in either scheme. It's purely the nature of the evidence that they can use to show that they have the same areas and fundamental competences. So yeah, I mean, we would expect CBICAS consult on build control consultants and others to demonstrate exactly the same level of knowledge of law and regulatory process. So I'm not sure why you think that's excluded. If I've said something that indicates that, that's not the case. So I hope that helps. Chris Farley, a lot of RBIs have gone into consultancy work. We do not have access to strict absence and function unless part of an MDT. We'll end up with many registered inspectors not being able to revalidate as they now work in consultancy, leaving even less registered RBIs available. Consultancy surveyors are advising on HRBs, etc., and do have relevant knowledge. This does need addressing with the BSR. Yeah, I think we're in the process of trying to encourage the BSR to look at these workforce planning issues much more closely. I agree. There are a whole range of circumstances that haven't been planned for as such. And the key issue is that we need a workforce that is capable and sufficient to deliver the inspection activities. Some of these barriers are created by the registration framework, and we will certainly be having those discussions over time. The workforce planning issues that kind of flow from this are absolutely critical in our view. So yes, we will be talking to the BSR about that. It's not within our gift though to amend the criteria for registration that are needed, or to for us to determine how resourcing of the MDTs is managed, for instance. But it's a very valid point, and I think in the public interest terms, it does need to be looked at. We're running a bit beyond time, so I'm going to do two more questions. There was some mention of CABE approaching the BSR regarding extending the registration time to 6 years. Has there been any developments in this? I think the feedback we have is that does suggest that some more time and space is needed for things to bed in, but that hasn't materialized into anything more substantive. We'll be doing our building control survey again in the new year. And I think that if people respond to that, there'll be questions in that about intentions with regards to their future career development. That would be very useful evidence in terms of us being able to feed into the regulator as to whether there is a need to reconsider or reevaluate how the revalidation process is managed to best support capacity in the workforce. Okay. that brings us to the end. I think I've lost one. Oh, there was one last question. Okay. Another, I don't know. David Clayton's the last question. And it's not a great, it's a compliment. It's a great presentation as always, Richard. Clear and very informative. Thank you. Well, David, that's great. That's a very nice way to end. I didn't realize that that was what you'd said. Okay. Apologies for running over. If people want to get in touch, please get in touch with CABE HQ or email me at rharral@cbuilde.com. I'm always interested in your feedback. I hope that's been useful, and we will no doubt be in touch as various aspects of revalidation and these other scheme development elements develop. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.